In March 2022, American Taylor Fritz faced off against Rafa Nadal at the Indian Wells final. The tournament in California meant a lot to Fritz because he himself was born and raised in the state. As a boy, his dad would take him to the tournament, and one day Fritz Sr. said to his son, "One day you'll win this tournament." From that moment, young Taylor had one goal above everything else in tennis: win his home tournament. But in 2022, the reality was that the odds were stacked against him. It had been 21 years since the last American man had won the competition, and the man Fritz had to beat in the final had enjoyed his best start to a season ever, winning 20 matches in a row. The morning of the final, Fritz went out for a practice session, and only a few shots in felt an excruciating sharp pain run through his right ankle. He collapsed to the floor and immediately thought his final was over. Given how close the final was, he was unable to get a proper diagnosis, but his team thought Fritz's best option would be to pull out. But the American thought otherwise. This was the biggest match of his life against one of his idols. He had to at least try to play. Despite his team thinking he only looked 60% fit, Fritz made his way out onto the court after an injection in his now taped up ankle. Although this was the most pressurised match of his life against a man he had never beaten before, Fritz was surprisingly calm. The fear of playing against someone so dominant was no longer there. Fritz felt composed and ready to just see what happened. And in a remarkable turn of events, Fritz shocked Nadal to win the final in straight sets. As he secured championship point, he collapsed to the ground in sheer disbelief. Only hours earlier, he was limping around believing that there was no chance of playing, let alone winning. After the emotional celebrations died down, Fritz tried to make sense of his win and realised that this serious injury scare was a blessing in disguise. He said to the media, "It helped me. I knew I had absolutely nothing to lose. I had a serious injury and I didn't think I was going to play. It definitely loosened me up and I was like, who cares? I'm injured, and let's go out there and do what I can." Whether he realised it or not, Taylor Fritz engaged in one of the best methods that athletes can use in order to boost their confidence, and that is through positive reframing. Being injured before the biggest match of his life was a clear negative. The easy thing would have been for him to just complain, moan, and feel sorry for himself. But instead, he saw that there could be something good that came from it. He knew deep down this injury took the pressure off him. His expectations were lowered, and this allowed him to feel more confident. For Fritz, success was just initially starting the match, and this allowed him to adopt a point-by-point strategy of easing into the match. You hear time and time again about the power of positive thinking, but you rarely see how it should be applied in the most practical sense. Positive thinking is often just misguided and deluded. Clueless statements fueled by fake positive emotion. But instead, positive reframing, the kind of positive thinking Fritz did, is a lot more logical. It's about looking objectively at the situation and then thinking about any realistic way of reinterpreting it. Fritz knew objectively the situation was shit. It was the worst thing that could have happened to him. But he deliberately thought deeply about any possible benefit. And for him, this was that it just took the pressure off him. The pressure of being the favourite among his home crowd, who desperately wanted him to win, and the pressure of winning to live up to the expectations his dad had for him. A lot of the time we lose confidence because we feel unequipped to reach something that seems so lofty and huge. But as much as it seems counterproductive, we can actually increase our confidence by letting those things go for a moment. Instead, if we just focus on turning up, trying what we can and seeing how we get on, that can sometimes actually lead to the success we're looking for. And that's exactly what Fritz did. In positively reframing his situation, he allowed himself to just do the basics, which was just play some tennis. There was no pressure on himself to please the crowd and win the title. And because of this mental shift, he was able to put in the performance of a lifetime. So the next time you face a particular challenge or are apprehensive about an upcoming performance, try your best to reframe the situation. And to do this, ask yourself these 3 questions. Firstly, what is the actual reality? And this may be that you're facing an opponent who is much higher ranked than you. And then secondly, ask yourself, how does this make me feel? And it may be that it makes you feel anxious or nervous. But then finally, ask yourself, how else could this be reinterpreted? Often you find that being nervous or anxious is a good thing because it's gearing you up to perform. It's your body and mind's way of preparing you. That increased heart rate is pumping more blood to your brain to make quicker decisions and to your muscles to fuel more explosive movements. When you reframe situations like this, you feel more assured because you realize what you're experiencing is completely normal and can actually help you if you take the time to better understand these feelings. But the thing with positive reframing is that it's often reactive, meaning it happens after something has happened that knocks our confidence. And by that time, it can be easy to let a negative situation spiral into an absolute cycle of negativity. So what can you do instead to prevent this from happening? Well, let's chat about Jordan Pickford. In a crucial relegation battle game against Leicester in May 2023, Pickford's Everton were down 2-1 when the Foxes were awarded a penalty. And it was Pickford's England teammate James Maddison who stepped up to take what would have been a game-finishing strike. As the Leicester number 10 took his run-up to the ball, Pickford jumped slightly to his right before then hopping back to the centre of his goal, just in time for Maddison's strike to reach him at a comfortable height. This save was vital as Everton would then go on to grab an equaliser and take a point back home with them. Cameras spotted that Pickford's movements on his line were not random and him taking a chance. He actually deliberately stayed central because he knew that this is where Maddison most frequently hit his penalties. And he knew this because on his water bottle was stuck on pictures of the penalty statistics for Leicester's 3 most common penalty takers. Using this tactic allowed Pickford to guess correctly, as he knew Maddison would hit 60% of his penalties down the middle. And this was not the first time that Pickford's used this clever tactic. He's used it for a number of years for both England and Everton. Saving penalties is one of the hardest things in football. It's often the case that no one expects a goalie to save them full stop. But throughout his career, Pickford has made numerous impressive penalty saves in regular matches as well as penalty shootouts. It's rare to see a goalkeeper be confident about facing penalties because, again, it's arguably the worst thing you have to deal with. But what Pickford has done time and time again with this water bottle tactic is engage in a pre-mortem. A what? Well, you've probably heard of a post-mortem, which is where we look for the cause of death after someone has died. But a pre-mortem is a bit different. Instead of being reactive and waiting for an outcome to happen like you do in a post-mortem, what you do in a pre-mortem is try to identify any possible contributing factor to an outcome before it's actually happened. It's typically been used in business to map out all possible obstacles and barriers that can lead to a big project failing, but it can also be applied to sports where you map out literally anything that can go wrong so that you can best deal with those things when they do occur, and so you avoid the failure they can typically cause. Some would say conceding a penalty in football is one of the worst case scenarios. It's a failure of some kind. But in actively preparing for that failure, Pickford and his labelled water bottles allow him to increase his chances of not letting that failure prove fatal. Another example of this I heard about a few years ago was that apparently Jose Mourinho would sometimes get his team to train with 10 men, so that if they got a red card, they'd be able to better manage playing with less men than the opposition. So if you adopt a pre-mortem, you can better plan out how to deal with any situation that is thrown at you unexpectedly during a big performance. Often not having confidence comes down to feeling a lack of control. And because of that lack of control, you panic, you lose your cool, and your performance can really spiral out of control. But doing a pre-mortem allows you to regain that confidence because you have specific processes and plans to follow if and when some of those negative things pop up. So to do one of these, just ask yourself a few days before a big performance, what could possibly go wrong? And this could literally be anything, like getting stuck in traffic on the way to the game, or a kit issue like losing a stud on your boot. Just anything that could throw you off slightly and knock your confidence. And then the simple next step is just to ask yourself, how can I minimize the impact of this? So it may be leaving 30 minutes earlier so you don't get caught in traffic, or packing extra studs in your kit bag. And look, there's obviously infinite possibilities, but just think of some of the most common ones. What are things that you know, if they were to happen, would just cause you to panic slightly and knock your confidence? And just come up with some super practical steps to lessen their impact. I get it though, even with all that planning and preparation, sometimes it's still very difficult to get our mind to convince our body into feeling confident and ready to put in that peak performance. But here's the thing, sometimes if you reverse this and actually use the body to trick the mind, you can easily get back into that confident state. And perhaps the greatest athlete ever at doing this was Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was known to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee because he was fast, like really fast. And people don't always remember he was 6'3" and 214 pounds. He was a unit. So to see that level of speed in someone so big was mesmerizing. In heavyweight boxing, typically it's thought whoever has the most power wins. And whilst that's somewhat true, Ali showed us that speed can be an even more effective tool to victory. To highlight this, Ali would engage in the Ali shuffle, a rapid flurry of his feet that many thought was just mere showboating. But it was actually a strategic tactic to use body language as a tool to increase Ali's confidence and give him the belief that he had a clear advantage over his opponents. Before fights, Ali was always nervous and experienced performance anxiety, but he would always be intentional with how he carried himself to give off a more confident aura. And in doing this, his body would convince his mind he was confident, that he was prepared and could go on to beat any opponent. And by shuffling away in the middle of a fight, Ali was showing his opponent that he could outmove them, that they would be left chasing him, that he could easily duck, weave, and skip away from their attacks. And this was something not common in heavyweight boxing. Most guys were big and powerful, but slow. So having someone dance around in the way Ali did was a threat. It would not only enhance Ali's confidence, but sometimes decrease the confidence of his opponents. Because Ali knew doing this was a distraction. It would cause his opponents to lose focus for a split second, and in that time they would forget what their next move was going to be. And then what this allowed Ali to do was then get himself out of positions, either to defensively retreat or spring an attack. It was literally his way of winding up his confidence to then be used against his opponents in the most devastating ways. Now I know doing a little shuffle is not going to be super effective in most sports, so to better understand how to use body language to improve your confidence, whatever your sport, check out this next video here.